Oi, oi, it's your boy, the Brian Battle of Fighting Prattle, Jack Slack. It's the Jack Slack podcast, and we're coming at you on Monday, the 25th of September, following a weekend with a UFC, a Bellator, a One, and some boxing, which we'll probably get to on the Boycast. But, yeah, it was okay. It was one of those weekends where things didn't quite work out the way that they ideally would have. So you had a banging lightweight fight lined up between Mateusz Gamrot and Rafael Fiziev. Great clash of styles. You got the grappler, you got the striker. You got two guys nearing the top of that incredibly cutthroat lightweight division. They fight each other. They have a good round. Things had just come into a simmer. And then Rafael Fiziev's knee explodes on a kick that he threw and didn't really hit anything. Immediately drawing comparisons to the Tom Aspinall fight. There's been a couple lately where guys... I was thinking of Ortega versus Rodriguez. There's been a few recently that people feel like... Well, I feel like you watch the fight and you go, it's unfortunate that happened. Has brought out a lot of weird behaviour in the fan base, though. People say, like, we need a special category for injuries. They need to not be counted as TKOs. And it's like, the TKO isn't that he blew out his knee. The TKO is that once he blew out his knee, he fell on the floor screaming, and Mateusz Gamrot went in and punched him a few times, and he couldn't defend himself. Now, people have fought off their back with blown out knees and all sorts before. If you remember Andre Sukmatath, he managed to convince Sean O'Malley to fight him on the ground once his leg had completely given out. A very strange fight, but yeah, you can continue fighting on your back. It's if the other guy stands up and you can't answer the call to get up, then that's another TKO too. But TKO is for you cannot defend yourself. Doesn't matter how it happens, provided it's not by an illegal technique. That's just the way it is. As the song by, Bruce Hornsby goes. So people have been going back and forth. And to be honest, you never know how much of this is just the new way that Twitter is. It's absolutely dreadful, if I'm honest. Just dudes with blue checks posting stupid things that people then share going, oh my God, can you believe this stupid thing? It's like, yeah, I can, because the guy just wants the engagement because they're giving out like, $10 per million impressions or whatever it is at the moment, or they will be for like a month. And then that will immediately dry up. But it has just made like the worst Twitter experience ever recently. There's nothing sincere on there. I mean, I'm not tremendously sincere on Twitter myself. I'm a very snarky person, but I do post the odd fight breakdown or link to a podcast or whatever. But nobody is putting out interesting content on Twitter. Or certainly, unless you're following them, you won't see it. The stuff that says like for you is always just some idiot posting they should add an injury clause to nullify fights if one guy goes down injured. Or who's the worst UFC champion ever? I'll start picture of Brock Lesnar. Which nobody believes. It's just to get you to engage with it. It's like that Bradley Martin stuff. Oh, I'm so mad about the last thing that Bradley Martin said about taking on an MMA fighter. I'm going to share it to everyone. But yes, if we had like a special category for injury loss, who decides what's an injury? There's all kinds of weird ones, like Jack Dempsey hit a guy in the jaw and the guy, in the course of stumbling, turned his ankle and couldn't stand. And that was a big laughing point in the papers at the time. They were like, hit him so hard he broke his ankle. But I remember when Jared Cannonier kicked the stuffing out of Anderson Silva's leg, Anderson Silva went down, and because he had an injury in the fight with Chris Weidman, people were like, oh no, the knee again. And Tapology and Sherdog both had TKO brackets leg injury for a week or two after that, and then changed it. But it was the other leg. It wasn't the one that he'd even injured previously. And it was injured by being kicked. And if someone kicks you and jars their knee or whatever, if it's not... You don't just want to absorb kicks. When you block a kick, you want to take it with both arms. You want to guide it onto like the hardest portion of your shin. You want the other guy to kick something, and ideally it hurt, and they go, oh, I'm not doing that again. You're not just there to absorb kicks. So when Chris Weidman checks a kick perfectly, or Ernesto Hoost does against Ray Safo, or Gokhan Saki does against Tyrone Spong, that's not just like, oh, fight's invalid, No, it was a perfect check. The guy broke his own leg over your shin. Now, this wasn't a perfect check. This was just like luck of the draw. But, it's people asking for special treatment because something happened to one of their faves. Kind of like how we were all supposed to relitigate the 10-8 stuff last week when Valentina lost. So as a fight, I thought it was pretty interesting. Gamrot looking confident on the feet. My complaint about Gamrot is always that he looks scared on the feet, never throws any kicks, switches stances and throws ones and twos, but never builds off it. And here he was actually doing all right. What I really like, we're 6 minutes in and I haven't plugged the article yet. I wrote a post-fight breakdown of Rod Tang versus Superleg and this card. It is up on the Patreon for the Patreon boys. I'm going to be referencing it several times in this episode, but in my article I talked about briefly, my theme on this fight was everyone is switch hitting a little bit now. And both these guys switch hit a lot, working off both stances. And we've been talking about this for a while, but you should be looking for what kind of stance matchup it is. Not what leg are you on, not what leg the opponent's on. It's what kind of stance matchup is it. If it's an open stance matchup, you're going to be able to throw your rear straight easier. You're going to be able to throw your rear kick above the waist, your rear round kick above the waist. You're going to be able to throw your rear front kick really well. You're going to have to look, if you're looking for calf kicks, you've got to do a step-up calf kick. If it's a closed stance position where you're orthodox and they're orthodox, or you're southpaw and they're southpaw, you're both in the same stance, you're looking for your jab, you're looking for your outside low kick, you're looking for the calf kick with your rear leg. You're looking to slide back and time the calf kick on them stepping forwards. So it's really interesting watching guys who are actually looking at their opponent and hitting them as they switch. Because hitting someone as they switch, you have to anticipate them a little bit, but you can't just throw it before they switch, obviously. You have to anticipate them switching stances, and then you hit them with the right weapon for the stance they're going into. So the example I always give is Gennady Golovkin versus Danny Jacobs. He was having a hell of a time with Danny Jacobs, who was switch hitting, and Danny Jacobs would go southpaw every now and again. And so Golovkin just sort of sat back, waited for Danny Jacobs to go southpaw, and the moment that he did, he stepped deep and he threw his right hand straight off the bat. It was if he was still orthodox, that right hand would have hit Danny Jacobs on the shoulder or been on the line of the shoulder. It would have been a lot easier for Danny Jacobs to dodge or get under or roll with or take on the shoulder or take on the forearm. It's very hard to throw naked right hands at people if you're both in orthodox stances. But the moment that guy switched to southpaw, there's a big opening there. You're only contending with his back hand. His shoulder's not in the way at all. And it lines up better. You can step down the outside of his leg. So Golovkin hammers him with this perfect shot just because he catches him changing. There's an interesting idea from, I can't remember, Gogun Yamaguchi, who was a Goju-ryu karateka way back in the day. But he had a list of 8 kyo. And I think there's similar things in Japanese fencing, kendo and things like that. But it's 8 moments of weakness. And they all do exist in fighting, but they're harder, some of them are harder to get a read on it and actually exploit than others. Like when the opponent's breathing in. Very hard to do that. You see people get hit with body shots breathing in and they just fold in a heap. But it's very hard to take advantage of someone breathing in unless they're already breathing pretty hard. Unless you're a heavyweight and you're both gassed from the opening bell, hard to take advantage of that. A little bit easier in grappling. You can sit on top of someone. You can be on top of someone in top half guard and dig an elbow to the body as you time them breathing in. And that's, or in the clinch with knees. And that's something that you can, that will have a bigger effect than it should, or it looks like it should. You can amplify the effect of body strikes by timing them on the breathing in. More obvious ones are as someone's attacking you, there is a massive moment of weakness there because they are focused on what they're doing. They're putting their weight forward towards you. But there's also this sort of divide between the physical guard being in position to take strikes, which is what we're always saying, get back to, throw your strikes, get back on your guard, get back on position, get back in position to take strikes. But then there's also the mental guard. And the mental guard is where you crack people on the stance shift. Because when they change stances, it takes a second for them to go, right, now I'm working southpaw versus orthodox. Now I'm working open stance or whatever. And so if you wait for them to switch and you hit them on the switch, or you have your move ready to go and you switch and hit them with something that wasn't an issue before in the previous stance matchup, that's when you can really catch people. So there was a lot of that, or there was a little bit of that in this fight. Gamrot twice. Once when Fiziev switched in front of him. They were both orthodox. Fiziev pulled his left leg back, stepped forward with his right leg into southpaw, and Gamrot immediately pumped a right straight off the bat, naked, and hit him in the face. Then there was another occasion where Fiziev kept leveling out his stance, so pulling his left leg back towards his right foot and then circling to his left with his feet level. And sometimes he'd circle and then end up in a southpaw stance. And sometimes he'd circle and end up in an orthodox stance. And that's a really good way to switch hit. I talked about this years ago with Max Holloway versus Cub Swanson, but if you're moving left to right and then using that to change your stances while you're sidestepping, really hard to take advantage of that. But because he kept doing it the same way, left foot back, circle off to the left, he didn't ever do it to his right. Gamrot was able to step forward and time him with the right hand again. But then Fiziev timed Gamrot really nicely. Gamrot went southpaw, Fiziev was orthodox. Fiziev faked, Gamrot stepped back and changed stances to orthodox, started to come in again to get back to a closer range because he'd fallen for a feint and he went, oh, okay, right now I'm going back in. And as he stepped in, Fiziev hammered him with the outside low kick on the calf, which is perfect. Wouldn't have been there a second earlier when Gamrot was southpaw, was there the moment that he stepped back in orthodox. And that's what I think MMA fighters have to do now that basically 50% of fighters do some level of switch hitting. You have to look at what the stances are and have 2 or 3 things that you know work in each stance matchup. And then if the stances stay together for a while, you know, you're both working from a set stance for a little while, you can start working more complicated things. But catching people on the switch is a great way, because they're doing they think they're doing something clever, but often one of the reasons that everyone gets worried about switch hitting anyway is that your defense sort of lags. And part of that is that your brain has to sort of switch modes. So that was all deep and technical shit. Sorry. Well, actually, it was a little bit philosophical about striking there. I'm thinking of putting together my Advanced Striking 2.0 series. I really enjoyed doing, and I'll probably add more to that too, but I've got about 12. Is it 12? Yeah, I think I've got about 12 articles in that series, and that's one that I illustrated myself, and it's just I put a lot of effort into that one, and I think I'd like to do the same sort of thing but with sort of an MMA striking toolkit, not specifically like have a jab or whatever, but specifically things like you need to be able to calf kick off both stances with both legs. So you need a step up left calf kick and a step up right calf kick, and you need a rear leg left calf kick and a rear leg right calf kick, and having those 4 things will put you way ahead of everyone else, just because the calf kick is such a weapon in MMA at the moment. But some stuff on like ring craft and so on. I'd quite like to keep it to less than 10 and not necessarily specific techniques, but tactics within MMA that are working really well right now. But anyway, that was interesting. Then there was the wrestling stuff, and Gamrot, like the overwhelming thing you get with Gamrot is that he spends an awful lot of energy chaining takedowns in really exciting ways and then can't hold people down. And I think a lot of it stems from the fact that most of his takedowns end up in him trying to finish a single leg, not him getting a body lock or getting behind someone with a body lock along the fence, or trying to throw them or tripping them to the mat from an over-under clinch or a double unders clinch, or a double leg. That's the other big one. It's all single legs. And his finishes to the single leg are all based on like raising the leg as high as possible or kicking out the standing leg. And the problem with those, especially if you watched like the Sarukian fight and the Fiziev fight, is that smaller guys who are pretty flexible and pretty athletic, lifting their leg up to shoulder height is not a guaranteed takedown. If you watch Glover Teixeira versus Yuri Prochaska, who throws some high kicks, he's a decently flexible dude for that size, but every time Glover Teixeira gets his head up, it gets Jiri's foot up to shoulder height and just runs at him, Jiri falls on the floor. Arman Sarukian's hopping 25 feet across the cage backwards and then slipping his foot off the shoulder when they hit the fence. And the same thing happened with Fiziev in this one. The first takedown that Gamrot attempts, he gets the leg all the way up and he runs at Fiziev, and Fiziev hops backward, frees his leg, and then gets offline. And then the other half of that is like if you get a single leg and you're focused on like finishes that don't involve snatching up the other leg as well, the guy can immediately start scrambling when he hits the mat. So when he did get Fiziev down, Fiziev immediately turned over, started getting up. Actually, one of the interesting things about Fiziev, when he goes to his hands, sometimes it's called like a referee's position, but nowadays people tend to call it like the open turtle to differentiate it from, the classical turtle of jiu-jitsu and judo. It's big in judo too, but turtling is hands on your knees and elbows, basically with your head on the mat and curled up in a ball. And an open turtle is you get your hands on the mat and you get your head up, and that's the position that you start getting up from. Now, you won't see that, well, until recently, you wouldn't see that in like a grappling competition because you're worried about the guy hopping on your back, choking you, and so on. But it has always been hugely important in MMA because getting up is way more important than like slowly getting back to guard. Plus, of course, in jiu-jitsu, if you're on the bottom, you've probably been taken down, you've already lost the points. Why get up and get taken down again and lose more points? Whereas in MMA, you are losing points by staying on the mat. You've got to get up to make stuff happen, or ideally get on top. So when Fiziev goes to an open turtle and he puts his hands on the mat and starts getting up, he puts his fists down like classical martial artists doing press-ups on their fist, which I thought was really interesting. I mean, it makes him a little bit taller, which, as in like his shoulders come up a bit higher, which was interesting. I don't know if there's any actual advantages to it, but it did remind me of something that Billy Robinson used to say. And the reason that I do when I'm in an open turtle, I have my fingers curled so that my palms on the floor, but my fingernails, the face of my fingernails is still on the mat. But yes, having your fingers curled in on the mat and not just splayed out there, because Billy Robinson used to say like, that's when people will pull your fingers, especially if there's like money on the line or something like that. You've really got to worry about that. So, and that's also why people say don't have your hand open when you're putting your hand in for a rear naked choke. Well, I mean, one, you can scratch the guy with your nails, even if they're very short. But two, like when you're trying to choke someone from behind, they are flailing and they will grab whatever they can get. So it was interesting seeing that he did that. Fists closed, or any time his hands were on the mat, his fists were closed and he was on his knuckles. And this fight was really just getting cooking, because the whole thing was like Fiziev's very good at stopping a takedown and very dangerous striking from the clinch. So, can he turn that back on Mateusz Gamrot? And sadly, like, Mateusz Gamrot now has a number of wins that are just so unconvincing. His win over Jalen Turner, his last one, the split decision, a lot of people felt he lost that. His win over Sarukian, a lot of people felt he lost. It's been a rough time being a Gamrot fan. But what else was on the card? Bryce Mitchell versus Dan Ige was, aside from the memes, just freedom. I can already hear people in the YouTube comments being like, oh, holding up the Bible and shouting freedom was cringe, Jack. Would it be cringe if he held up the Quran and shouted Allah? And I'd say, yes, it would. Like, people doing things at an inappropriate time is pretty cringe. If he'd held up a printed copy of the Ali Act and shouted freedom, I'd have been like, based. But yeah, Dan Ige, I don't want to say another Dan Ige game plan disaster here, but there were some things here that like Bryce Mitchell was able to take advantage of. Dan Ige hurt him, or was hitting him with some hard shots early on when they came together. But you'll notice Bryce Mitchell, when he was the southpaw, when he slid back to his left, when he spiraled out, Dan Ige would just run in a straight line and lose him. Because Dan Ige's offense is all running in a straight line, pumping hands. And Bryce Mitchell did well for himself by being game, exactly like he did against Edson Barboza. Every time he's matched up with one of these guys, we go, oh yeah, he's getting murked because he doesn't have any power in his hands. He's not a striker. He's only got that one weapon. Everyone knows what's coming. As soon as he meets someone who can wrestle and strike, they're going to have trouble. Dan Ige can wrestle and strike. He's not too different. I said this before, but like he's not too different to Ilia Topuria in like physical attributes. He's a good hitter. He's a good wrestler. It's just that Ilia Topuria is a much smarter fighter who uses those better. But I thought the takedown in the second round was really nice. I mean, that just showed how Mitchell was able to operate on the feet, even against a much bigger hitter who was beating him up a lot of the time that they were trading. Slid back, and then as Ige came in, he hit him with the left straight on the chin and ducked on his legs, and it worked really, really well. Kept coming up to the standing body lock on the back, kept putting in the broomstick, putting his foot across to the far knee. Got some good positions, like mounted him in round 2 and so on, but didn't do a lot of damage. And again, like this is the whole damage versus control thing. And I found it hilarious that when I went to the post-fight thread on Reddit to check people's thoughts on the score, immediately there's a one with like 400 upvotes being like, and this is how it relates to Jan versus O'Malley. Those guys, they will not let go of that ever. So that fight was ho-hum. Marina Rodriguez versus Michelle Waterson was brutal. I thought Michelle Waterson did a great job getting out there early and trying to put it on Rodriguez. She landed a couple of strikes right off the bat and then hit a takedown. And I was like, fucking hell, where's this been, Michelle Waterson? And then Marina Rodriguez got up and started hammering her with knees in the clinch. and then got the double collar tie and started hitting her with more knees. And then Michelle Waterson was just covered in blood, getting battered. I had a minute 30 going left in the first round, and I looked at the results and saw that it went to the second round. I was like, how on earth does that happen? Because this should have been, in any reasonable sport, a throwing the towel in moment. You are getting the shit kicked out of you. You're not learning anything. You're Michelle Waterson. You have no record of come from behind stoppages. You barely have a record of stoppages. But the Jackson Wink crew in her corner, I think her husband was one of her coaches in her corner, which is always terrible. I'm going to say, I think Luke Thomas has said this before, but like, having your family as part of your training is not great to begin with. People like Roy Jones end up falling out with their fathers and not talking to them for years. But if you're going to have your family coach you, don't have them in the corner. Have someone else that they trust in the corner. Have someone you trust in the corner. There's not enough coaches in MMA to begin with who are willing to throw in the towel and willing to actually look after their fighter. But try and find yourself someone who is professional enough to do that, who will say, like, I am not that committed to the win bonus that I need you to almost die. You know, if I save you now, you can have 2-3 more fights that you wouldn't have if I let you take a beating. Boxing's really good for this. You know, if you watch like Gennady Golovkin versus Kell Brook came out, he was a big underdog, did decently well in the first couple of rounds. Things start going tits up. His corner go, okay, well, let's get him out of there. He's not going to gain anything from taking a beating here if he's going to lose. Made a ton of money, gained some prestige, and most importantly, live to fight another day and win some more fights. But the moment that I was like really just screaming at this screen was when in the second round she tries to pull her head out of she gets pulled into a clinch almost with a double collar tie again, and she pulls back so violently that when Marina Rodriguez's hands slip off her head, she falls back onto the mat. And where most people, if they fell back onto the mat, they would keep their head off the floor because that's what you're trained to do your entire life. Her head just cracks back against the mat and she almost knocks herself out. And then she stumbles up and sort of ambles off in the other direction like a deer that's just been run over. That was terrible. And her corner didn't stop it then. So, and the ref was just doing a shite job too. I mean, rightly, people were making jokes about this guy having money on Waterson or the over or something like that, but just fucking dreadful from everyone involved except Waterson. You know, I hate watching Michelle Waterson's fights. I think her style is ugly and I do not enjoy it. Not ugly as in like the form of the strikes, as in like she just doesn't get close enough. But she's been fighting up in weight for the best part of a decade because the UFC brought her in and then refused to open an atomweight division. And she was like the perfect person for an atomweight division because she's, you know, pretty charismatic, she's attractive, she's, you know, that size, and she had some good fights at atomweight before she came to the UFC. But she's been fighting at this handicap forever. Just ludicrous that she has to get beaten half to death for seemingly no reason. Anything else good on this card? Actually, let's hop across to Bellator. Their main event, Johnny Eblen versus Fabian Edwards. Really disappointing, to be honest. Not a lot happened until the knockout. I mean, obviously everyone was like, yeah, knockout, because the people who want to tout Johnny Eblen as the best middleweight in the world, they only watched the clip on Twitter. The actual fight was pretty mediocre. I mean, Johnny Eblen couldn't take down Fabian Edwards was pretty much the summary of it. But Fabian Edwards kept kicking from right on top of Johnny Eblen. So he kept getting hit with counters on one leg and eventually got knocked down and beaten up. Johnny Eblen, I mean, he makes a good case. He's a good guy at mixing his skills. But watching the first 2 rounds of this where Fabian Edwards is walking him down and easily shucking off his takedowns, I'm like, you know, I don't want to give Sean Strickland credit for anything, but I'm not seeing this as like the foregone conclusion that Johnny Eblen just runs through Sean Strickland. And he won the fight, and then he immediately called out a welterweight in another organisation. He was like, Leon Edwards, you're next. And everyone was like, that's fucking stupid. Aaron Pico was actually impressive. He was against Pedro Cavalia. Boxing's always great. I mean, Pico's boxing and his wrestling are always great. His wrestling's lovely, short level changes, and he boxes into his level changes. It's not that he's got this great wrestling pedigree and this great boxing pedigree. It's that they actually work together really well, which is something that you don't often see from people like the Cody Garbrandts and the Henry Cejudos, you know, people with good wrestling and good boxing, or who had a decent degree of experience in both. He was banging him with left hooks, and then, you know, he threw a combination of 3 punches, and as Cavalia was trying to step off, he hit him with the left hook to the body. He did a beautiful level change and then came up on the back. He was throwing Cavalia around, and then Cavalia he was trying to be clever, He threw a right straight and tried to weave out, and it was beautiful. Pico just pivoted out and followed him with the uppercut. It was who did Lomachenko do that to? Go look at Lomachenko highlights. There'll be one. It'll be in there. But Lomachenko, he had a beautiful one a few years ago where he threw the left hook over the top of this guy's head because he knew the guy would weave out, and then he just followed him with the uppercut. Threw the uppercut across himself, knocked him out. Gorgeous. The read on this by Pico was fantastic. Such a talented fighter. I'm glad that he's getting it together now. Obviously, sometimes he loses and sometimes his shoulder explodes and shit like that. But when he's on, man, he's on. Oh, and his elbows from the guard were fantastic. He got like the can opener position. You know, you're in top closed guard. You grab behind the opponent's head with both hands and you pull him in, making it hard for them to move their hips and armbar or get up or anything, really. And instead of like trying to turn over elbows, he was throwing up elbows, which I really like because if you firstly, he was driving off the balls of his feet on the floor. He had his toes digging into the mat and he was like humping his way up Cavalia's body every time he threw this elbow. But when you got their face like that, it's just like, you know, your elbow's going to catch on either their nose or their eye sockets, basically. Anything that's poking out the front of the face is what it's going to catch on. And he did cut up Cavalia with that and eventually got the stoppage. It was really nice. I mean, not by cuts. He beat him up and got the stoppage. But, yeah, Aaron Pico, always worth watching. Always worth watching. Because he either, you go, Jesus Christ, this guy's so talented. Or you go, Jesus Christ, this guy's so talented. I can't believe he lost like that. While we're talking Bellator, it's probably worth talking about the fact that, like, if you didn't believe I mean, I was sort of skeptical about all the sales stuff because it was coming through, you know, lesser sources, and it was so back and forth. They were just like, oh, is it? Will they? Won't they? They're valued at 500 million, and you're going, well, obviously that's not what anyone would pay for them. This event, even if they weren't planning to sell, they've shot themselves in the foot because every fighter on this card, except Hamasi, didn't secure sponsors for themselves. They were wearing blank Bellator shorts because one of the great appeals of Bellator back in the day was like you can get your own sponsors again, because that was a big loss for fighters in the UFC when they brought in the uniform. Lots of fighters were basically making a lucrative career by having sponsors. The purses weren't covering it. You know, I don't want to say Brendan Shaw, paragon of truth, but like Brendan Shaw and Matt Mitrione and others have said that they cleared $100,000 in sponsorship for a fight. Matt Mitrione fired Malky Kawa on air because he didn't think he got good enough sponsors one fight. And when Rory McDonald came over and Benson Henderson came over, it was like, we'll get some good sponsors for you. And then I think Benson said that he was having trouble getting some sponsors recently. But that was supposed to be the appeal. The problem is that Bellator is constantly changing TV network. And if it's not like visible, people don't want to be attached to it. You know, the whole point of a sponsorship is that you have your sign on TV where people see it. But it's very rare, like even in like much lesser events than Bellator, the fighters have their own sponsors on their shorts, because that can be like the people, you know, the garage selling Fords down the road. The local dealer will sponsor your shorts. So that was weird, but weirder was the mat. Every position on the mat that they normally have their sponsors in was taken up. But where someone put up a clip of an earlier Bellator this week and it had like Burger King, all that sort of stuff. They still had Monster in the center because Monster is basically unopposed in the MMA sphere because Red Bull has a no blood sport rule, which is why Hans Mollenkamp can keep like making fighters humiliate themselves on his Instagram. But every other position around the clock basically was logos, but for networks that already carry Bellator, or literally just an advert for the next Bellator. And all the ring posts too. There was nothing there that actually made them any money. And people have rightly pointed out that people don't want to get into a long sponsorship with a company that's about to be sold, but surely you can get like a short sponsorship from someone. So yeah, that was really unpromising if you're Bellator. Basically, I'm saying these guys are absolutely sold. They are going down the tubes. They're going down the toilet. Unless PFL does the stupid thing, keeps them as their own brand, they're pretty much done. Other stuff on this. Oh, Mansour Banoui lost again, which is sad. He's not looked great since his 3-year layoff. But I don't think that was... I was always aware that he was sort of like a weird grappler with some weird physical attributes. I never thought he was like an elite striker. I never even thought that he was like an elite grappler in terms of like his tactics and his strategy. He was just weird, and I liked that. It's just that when that weirdness runs up against someone who's really well prepared and very good grappler in their own right, it sort of gets shut down. His fight with JJ Wilson was very back and forward. JJ Wilson, man, his grappling looked shit hot. His takedowns were great. His arm bars he kept throwing up from every position, and he kept almost getting Barnui. The fight finished in the third round with him with Barnui's arm locked out like Tony Ferguson, and Barnui like wincing, twisting his arm to try and get the pressure off it. But I was really impressed by JJ Wilson. He looked great, and apparently he's just moved to American Top Team, either this fight or last fight, and they've been doing great work with him, I think, because he's really standing out. Mansour Barnui did hit the giggler sweep in the third round, by the way. His weird grappling is that like he gives up mount and then he somehow ends up on your back. It's not always the best for like MMA where every positional advance and retreat sort of costs you. But yes, it was very funny. He did the move and I clapped. I clapped when he did the move. Peter Queally got fouled 20 seconds in and there was a no contest. Very funny. Anything else good? Mads Bennell versus Daniel Weichel. Weichel retired off this. He was an old head at Bellator. I think he traded... Was it a series of 3 with Pitbull back in the day? Oh, no, just the 2. But he's been with Bellator since like 2014. So he's a real old head. He's a good fighter. And Mads Bennell, he gave a decent fight to Mads Bennell. But Bennell did what he normally does. Fun boxing, moving forward, some calf kicks. The grappling was great. It's a really good, it's a fun fight. I would say if you're stuck for things to watch from last weekend, that's the one. Or at least a one. And then there was some, Irish lads. It was Dublin, and basically Bellator gets all of the Straight Blast Gym Island guys now, and they give them very winnable matches. Like Kieran Clark, really good guy, 8-0 as a pro now, and was good as an amateur. He fought like Magomedov as an amateur. And in his third fight, he beat a guy who was 8-1. And then that guy went on to like have a split decision loss to, I think, Harry Hardwick in his last one. George Hardwick's younger brother, who's also pretty good. So yeah, he beat a really good guy in his third fight. And now they're still giving him guys with like losing records, or guys who got, this guy was 5-3 coming in. And you go, well, yeah, we all see what you're doing. I mean, this guy was pretty fucking sloppy when you saw him. But basically every time Kieran Clark moved a shoulder on the feet, this guy swung an uppercut and missed. He just bit on every feint and then was easy to take down. Pretty lame is how I describe it. But that's what they do. They get the Irish lads and they get them wins in front of an Irish crowd. Kasan Magomed Sharipov was probably another one you want to talk about because he's Zabit's younger brother and he looks like him. And yeah, he fights a little bit like him. Fairly conservative, win over a not very good guy, but took him down, got the arm triangle. It was fine. Did a side kick to the knee at one point. Not so much spinny bollocks, which I'm sure makes MMA fans go, probably not as good then. Add some spinning bollocks and people's brains just fall out their ears. And then the big fight of the weekend, the one that everyone went mental over, was Rod Tang versus Superlek in 1 4-ounce Muay Thai. They've done it, guys. I've been saying this, like they're not really an MMA organization, but they sell themselves as MMA to look good on the investor brochure because MMA trends well. But what they really do is get really good Muay Thai fighters and have them fight in MMA gloves. And it works because like the MMA sphere on Twitter was all about this. The Reddit MMA, like 5 of the top posts were about this fight because Superlek missed weight. Really interesting because like a lot of people were telling me, Rod Tang's ducking Superlek, blah, 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 because it fell through last time. And this one they booked on a date that Rod Tang was giving a seminar in the States, and Rod Tang had been like eating his weight up and just partying apparently. So everyone thought Rod Tang was going to be the unprofessional end and make this fight fall through. Superlek turns up like 5 pounds over. And if you saw them next to each other, he's a lot bigger. I won't spoil this one too much because I wrote most of my article this week was this fight because I fucking loved it. Go and watch it. It's got like 2 million views already, and I mean like real views, not one saying it's got views. Rod Tang was not nearly the same success level as Superlek. Superlek was a Lumpini champion in 2 divisions, which is like as good as it gets. Was Sanshai like 4? I can't remember. There was a point where Sanshai was like going up in divisions because he couldn't get fights. But that's about as good as it gets. Whereas Rodtang, he had like one of the lesser stadium titles, and he'd had like the best fight at the other stadium that I can't say the name of. I say it in the article. It took a lot of time to get me to say it right. Rajadamnern. But he never won like the big accolades. So one of the criticisms of him from like Muay Thai nerds was that he's like an action fighter who found his place in one under their different rules. And, you know, fighting Superlek, he really did. Like, his style held up. He wasn't as technically slick as Superlek, but I likened him to Rocky Marciano because he really is one of those people. You know, you've seen clips of Rodtang just taking punches and laughing about them. Some people just have weird durability. And that's what Superlek found. Like, Superlek hit him with a perfect counter elbow, because Rodtang always opens with like a left hook to the body. He leaps in to get these trades, always leading with a left hook to the body or an up elbow, or a left hook to the head sometimes, but a left hook to the body or an up elbow. And he leaps in with his left hook to the body. Superlek lets him fall short, hits him with a counter right elbow that would like kill anyone else. So it hits Rodtang in the jaw. He turns around and like he's spinning Rodtang around while he's doing it. It hits him in the jaw, and then he starts loading up to hit him again. And Rodtang smashes him with this elbow that just splits the top of his head open. So from minute 2 of the fight, Superlek is just gushing blood. And what he found basically was every time that he got into a trade, Rodtang would take everything that he had and just keep throwing. So the difference was made in the later second round and the third round, where he just goes, because he's a good, really good kicker, very smooth on the outside. Good elbows. I mean, he smashed his last opponent with elbows, but he stopped trying to like finesse him, and he just put both hands on Rodtang's hands, because he'd been getting smashed with his up elbow too. And by putting his hands on Rodtang's wrists, and this is another thing I love about 4 rounds Muay Thai, open fingers, you can grab the fucking wrists. So he put his hands on Rodtang's wrists, and Rodtang basically couldn't attack him without really showing his hand. You know, if the other guy's got his hands on your hands, and then you try and leap in with a left hook to the body, your hand has to go down, and it makes it very obvious. So like then Superlek would hit him with the jab as he entered and things, return with the knee. Superlek was doing a great job of like taking the hands out of the equation and the elbows out of the equation, and then he'd step in with a knee, and really in the third round, digging his way to a full tie-up. Not hanging around on the outside, because there were some great clips in this fight where they get to sort of a semi-tie-up, a bicep tie, where Superlek would have his hands over Rodtang's biceps, and that's normally enough to sort of stop people doing anything. And Rodtang's still hitting him with elbows, with his hands in worse position. So by the end of this fight, Superlek is digging his way in, burying his head on Rodtang's chest, and then throwing knees. And I'm sure that pissed off Muay Thai fans, because like they kept breaking them and saying, you know, get back to action, but they would let you do that in Stadium Muay Thai, hold that position for a bit and keep kneeing, obviously. But man, the thought that I summed up that article with was Superlek did everything right in the second and third round. He looked great. His technical adjustments his reads were really good. He did the right things to beat Rodtang, and he did beat Rodtang, but every second of it looked absolutely miserable. That's one of the ways to make a fun fight. Like, even if you're losing, making the other guy fight for his life is a very impressive skill to have. Anyway, go watch that fight and then read my article, or do in the opposite order. I will be back in the middle of the week with the Boycast to talk about whatever's going on this weekend. What have we got? Hold on. Oh, no UFC this weekend, but we do have a one card, and I'll talk about Ryzen as well, actually, because some hilarious stuff happened on that card. But yeah, maybe we have a chill one on Wednesday, Thursday. Maybe we talk about some technical shit. Maybe we talk about some grappling. Maybe we talk about some other sports, some sumo. I don't know if there's sumo at the moment. Do we have a basho on? We'll find some shit to talk about. It'd be great fun. If you want to read my post-fight breakdowns, they come out every Sunday. They are a bastard to get done, but I get them done on Sunday. And they have an audio track if you don't like to read, or if you're dyslexic, or if you're just lazy. And you can get all of that by signing up to the Patreon, supporting the podcast, and being a boy. If you want to see what I'm writing at any time, fightprime.com. And if you want to send an email to the podcast, jackslackpodcast@gmail.com. I am your boy, Jack Slack. Johnny Bedlam bless.